So today we're going to be drawing outside. So I got my paper taped to the board, and in my charcoal kit we're going to use just two pieces of charcoal. So this is called grapevine charcoal. You can also get thicker versions of this called Willow charcoal. I like it a lot because it's super light, and when it draws it smudges very nicely, and it's very, very good for layout and doing very subtle shadows. And then the other is going to be a hard compressed charcoal of any type, just a little stick. And that's all we're gonna need. So I have picked this cactus as my model, as my figure, as my thing I'm going to draw. And this is the stage. This is what you will need. You will need all these. This is the setting. This is the establishing shot, as it were. You've got the model of the cactus. You've got which I picked because it's super weird and this bizarre organic structure. And you've got me, who is constantly looking up and down. You can see how much time I spend actually looking at it when I'm drawing. And when I'm looking at it, my eyes tracing the edges of between the positive and the negative space, trying to build this structure as I slowly discover it and pull it from reality onto the page. And then finally you have your drawing, which if you remember from the last lesson talking about blind contour, the drawing is kind of a footnote in this whole process, which it's mainly the act of really looking at it. It's more like an exercise of seeing is a way to think about doing still life drawing. And so this is an exploration of trying to understand this crazy structure that is this cactus. So something to think about is I haven't talked about value shading, and so this drawing will have very little value. It's more just about the shapes. So like the background, I'm just going to completely black out, and then the inside of the cactus will be lightly smudged, but just because I have smudged the willow charcoal to give it kind of a halo of shadow to give it some form. And then I only come in with some value to like give it some depth. So it's all like for clarity and atmospheric perspective and all this stuff. So I'm using the willow charcoal. It's a great way to lay out because when you smudge the willow charcoal, it almost disappears. So it's very it's very easy to it's a very forgiving piece of charcoal. And so I'm lightly tracing it. And if you don't put the right line down, just don't worry about it. Just go in and draw the line again. And I had an opportunity to like clean up that edge because since I'm gonna black out the background, you can always make the shape smaller and bring in the detail or like bring in the narrowness of those like cactus pads, like hands, whatever they are. Like you can bring that thin bit at the end. One of the biggest challenges I had about drawing this was having the shapes line up correctly. So right now I'm drawing something that is closest to me. There's nothing blocking it in front of it. But it's like this whole structure is this multi-layered thing in 3D space, and I'm trying to turn it into a 2D object. And since I'm just kind of like exploring up from the bottom and then drawing it almost as if it's growing, like I'm drawing it out from the bottom, these things don't quite line up as they do as I'm seeing them exactly. So there is some interpretation and maybe transfer error when it comes to like accurately bringing it down into the page. But that's okay because that will add to the style and the look and everything. And that's why we draw instead of take a photo. If I wanted it perfect, I'd be a photographer, but I'm not. Like, it's like I'm not a photographer. I like drawing. I like it. I like the transformation as I translate it through my eye into my hand. Also, just like a loose or just kind of an idea about composition for this. I wanted it to kind of bleed off the page. Like I kind of wanted to hone in on like some of those like windows of like negative space. So it's like it's like if you've got two of the arms of the cactus or like the branches, and they kind of overlap, and they make like a window, and there's like another arm of the cactus in between that. That's was more what was fascinating to me about this structure. So being able to like draw those arms behind the arms and like all these crazy pads and everything, that's what I'm trying to explore. So I didn't want the viewer of the final image to notice like that the cactus ends anywhere. Like I wanted it to go off the page. So I was drawing it in a way so it would bleed off a bit, and that's called activating, or no, that's not activating the space. That's like an open composition, because a closed composition would be if I drew the cactus, like if I just like shrunk it down like 20% maybe, and the whole cactus was in frame, and then it would have a nice black border all around it. I didn't really want that. I want it like exploding off the page, like it's this, as you know, it's a huge cactus. You know, this thing's super old, so like having it kind of like honoring how big it is. Okay, so now I'm coming in and smudging it. So this is what I meant by giving it just a loose halo. Smudging, they make these like little paper stomps for smudging. That's what they're called. They're called stomps, and they're very nice for getting clean detail. I don't want you to go buy like 1,000 pieces of art equipment, so I'm just trying to show how you would do it without a stomp. And if using your finger and like kind of just going like one direction with it and kind of lifting your finger up as you get to like smaller details, like you're almost like you're doing like a feather line with like a ink brush. It's like this lift. It's like a swipe, and so it's like it's less of like a back and forth, like you're filling it in with like a crayon or like a colored pencil, and it's more of a swipe. It's more of like putting your finger down and then moving it along and lifting it up. And then and consistency is really important when you're smudging. So like, you don't want like one arm of the cactus to look like, you smudged it differently than another arm. Consistency would be nice for the whole piece. And unless the arms don't look like that, unless that's like what you want to try to explore and understand. But if I tried to like capture all the detail of this thing, I think it would just be lost, and I would be doing, or like I would lose some of the clarity, and I'd also be working on this for probably 3 hours instead of just 1 hour is what I actually was the final time of this piece. So what I'm doing now, I've picked up the darker charcoal stick, the compressed charcoal, and I'm going over the lines, I'm cleaning it up, and because it doesn't smudge as much, because the willow charcoal will smudge with less pressure, the darker charcoal, I can just lightly smudge it and kind of clean the line. And you can tell like the difference between a charcoal line that's been smudged and not smudged. So like, if I just draw a line with charcoal, you're going to see like the paper fibers like kind of in between the lines, and it's kind of more gritty. Like it's got some like white paper coming through, and it looks really gritty if you just do one line. But if you come in and smudge it, it fills in all those little grits, and it also like smooths out the edges. So there's a very distinct look between a smudge line and a non-smudge line. And my goal was to have all the lines be smudged. So it's like I'm like rehashing like my mistakes or things I couldn't capture at that level of detail for that first layout. Think of it like you're slowly zooming in. It's like first like your eye is trying to capture like the structure, and now you can zoom in. Once you got the structure, you can be like, okay, what are some of the more detailed things about this structure that I can come in and do another drawing on top. It's almost like when I switched materials, I'm doing another drawing on top of this drawing. And then I switched back and forth between the charcoals often, just to just depending on like what tools I wanted to use. You can also use what effects I wanted to get from the tools. You can also use the charcoal, the willow charcoal, as a stomp. So like you can come in and draw and the stomp, and it will smudge the darker, denser charcoal, as well as fill in the lines and give it a nice smooth look. So that's another nice little trick. So in case your finger isn't small enough to like get that detail, doing in with that. And then also because your finger can't get all the little details, especially like when you're looking at those like little tiny tangents, those like little corners that are coming in, like right there, that little detail, that little corner. If I come in and smudge that, I'm just going to lose any detail that I got. So I might like tap it or like smudge it very slightly just to kind of do something so it doesn't look like it was neglected. But really what it comes down to is just you're not going to be able to smudge everything. And that'll give it kind of its own life because it's a charcoal drawing, so not everything has to be smudged. And having it kind of fade in and out of like the gritty, just heavy line drawn from the charcoal stick and the smudge, kind of fading in and out of that will give a nice effect for the drawing. Yeah. And just for clarity, I'm just blacking out the background. I'm just making it dark. So, the foreground character of the cactus really jumps out and jumps forward. And the language I use is very important. The reason why I call it a character is because it's not a still lifeless cactus. It's like, what if this? So like again, like I wanted to draw because I wanted to draw like characters and people and stories. So to be able to draw backgrounds, I try to think of them also as a crucial part of the character as well. Like and this is more true than you might think. So it's like having people are defined by their environment a lot, from like the food you eat to like how much sun you get. Like environmental strains really do build cultures and like around their environment. So environments are kind of part of your character as well. So trying to approach a piece of an environment like a landscape or a cactus as a character, this isn't what would be the term? It's not lifeless, It's like it has its own character, it has its own personality, and as an artist, you got to come in and try to capture that. So, and all the decisions I'm making are kind of like honing in on that, like how can I represent like the character that I think this is. I'm not too conscious of this, but like watching me draw this and talking out loud, it's definitely how I approach this and how I can get excited to do it. But while I'm drawing it, I've like zoned out. I'm like in some crazy flow state, just because I've done this a lot. And doing this process, it's almost meditative for me. So I'm not very conscious when I'm doing this. I'm very lost in the shapes and the moments and just trying to execute it technically. But kind of looking back on it, that's kind of my approach. I was kind of disappointed I couldn't get more of the detail of like those like little like flower buds that are on the end. So like those like last petals, those like last like cactus like petals that come out, they've got those like 5 like flower things that are very spiky. Those were very interesting structures, and that's something that like this medium I just had to like not draw. Like I just knew I couldn't capture those with the materials I was using, so I just kind of left them these like knobby, bubbly things that just like are at the end of the cactuses. But like if I was doing a graphite drawing or if I was doing ink work, especially like with tiny pens and stuff, I would have definitely gotten there. I would have like zoomed in with the camera and just taken a photo of just one of those and then tried to manipulate and then like try to copy paste that as my reference picture and just like try to draw all of those off of like a very tight detailed picture and try to bring that detail to life at the end of those. Because this is kind of a fractal pattern, right? So it's like each one of those, it's got like 3 big paddles, and each one of those paddles are made up of this like chain of paddles that are like splitting, and then the flower things are like the end of the fractal, and that's where it's like goes to infinity. And it's like because it's got petals and spikes and all this stuff. So it starts really simple. It starts with just these like 3 weird flat teardrop looking things, and then it ends up being this like tiny spike balls. So if you follow that fractal all the way down. What else was good about this? So coming back to for like clarity. So this was something I had a problem when I first started drawing from life. There was so much detail and I was so fascinated, and I could get in and capture all of it. I thought I was like, I had to. My job as the artist was to come in and represent this thing as authentically as possible so people will understand what I was looking at and what I saw and the beauty I saw in it and the layers and layers of detail. So like I put a lot of pressure on myself to try to draw things very detailed and very accurately. But at the end of the day, not every drawing has to capture absolutely everything about this. Like the values that like show the form of those like cactus paddles. I didn't even bother to try to grab. I was like, whatever shading comes in from me smudging the edge is what it's going to look like. And then, I had one main goal, which was put the structure down, explore the structure, explore the windows of negative space, and it, created by this cactus and all these arms. And so when I came in to do more detail, the detail was to clarify that goal. My goal was to show the form and the structure. So when I do a heavier line or when I pull like a gradient shadow off that line into another arm, I'm trying to show depth. So it's very clear to the eye that the arm goes behind another. Like you can, if you follow that like middle, the middle arm, because it's like this whole cactus is like 3 big branches. If you follow the middle branch up, you will see how it splits. And if you take the split going up right, it kind of goes behind one of the far right paddle's arms. And because it goes behind it, I put some value on that one to try and pull a shadow down and to show that, the far right arm was in front of it. So I doing things like that. And I could also do that with, I'm also doing that with the line work. Like I talked about in like lesson 1, when I was talking about line weight and showing clarity with the line weight and doing like thick to thin lines on the edge of things to try to like, hold the drawing together, because there to be like all the detail inside this thing is all the same thing. I'm doing that a little bit too. But since charcoal's a robust medium when it comes to value, I can make not only those lines, like I can make those lines not only thick to thin, but I can also change the value of the line. And because I've got 2 different mediums that make very distinctly different types of lines, with the willow charcoal versus like the man-made compressed charcoal. There's a lot of options you can do. There's a lot of different lines you can make with these tools, and with more options become, you can bring more clarity into it. Yeah, and you can see like how I did try to chase a little bit of value on that far left cactus arm. You can see how it's like I did value the edge of it, trying to give the sense that it's like nice and thick. And I didn't really try. Everything else was just from smudging the border. Those I did try to bring. That was all the willow charcoal for doing the shading on the inside, and I did bring some of that in and all that. Yeah, so this is like you can really see what I was trying to talk about earlier with like if you don't smudge your charcoal, it gets this like really like graphic or not graphic, gritty. It gets this really gritty feel. So I come in and clean up the border with the edge, and you can see how much of an option you have. Like if I draw the edge on the outside, I get a little highlight. Like that's what I just did there. Like when I defined the edge of that cactus paddle, like I gave it a highlight because I didn't draw where my line was supposed to be. So that's a nice way you can use like your layout line as a type of value shading. And then when you come in to draw the black background, if you pull it, if you don't go right up to that line, you'll get a nice little highlight. Or if you go past the line, you can make it smaller and tighter and define it more. So don't think you can't change the structure of the piece dramatically with each like rendition and layers on top. So it's like I kind of see this drawing as like 3 drawings, right? I did the first one with the willow charcoal. I did the next one cleaning up the edge with the compressed charcoal, and then I came in with the willow and the compressed at the end to try to like tighten the whole thing up and be happy with the final piece. So it's kind of 3 drawings stacked on top of each other. And that's it, done. Coming in with the old sign and date. Yeah, the willow charcoal wasn't quite dark enough to go in the dark background. So, boom. So I'm just gonna finish this drawing by taking the tape off. Now, typically you'd use something called fixative to protect the drawing and stop it from smudging. It's called fixing your drawing, and I don't have any fix here. It's at the screen printing studio. So instead, I was always told you could also use hairspray. I've got some hairspray, so I was gonna hit it with some hairspray. But that's the drawing.